Today on the State of Purple podcast, second interviews are underway, and Jim Harbaugh is scheduled to visit Minnesota on Wednesday. Also, Tom Brady officially announced his retirement. What might that mean for the future of the Vikings and quarterback Kirk Cousins? All of that and much more on today's episode of the State of Purple podcast, presented by Pilot Games.
Seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop. Steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side. Off by Diggs. Stay in Oh my God! 30! No 10! Touchdown! Are you kidding me? Miracle finish! It's a Minneapolis miracle! Oh my God! No way! What a miracle finish!
Happy Tuesday and welcome to the State of Purple. He's Jack Day. I'm Aj Mansour. This is KFAN's Minnesota Vikings podcast. Two podcasts in 2 days, Jack Day, because there's a lot of news, and that coaching carousel for the Minnesota Vikings continues to turn and continues to change on a daily basis. How you feeling, man? This is getting weird.
Yeah, I think it's even weirder now than what I was saying it was weird yesterday. It's been a lot of information that comes out, and then more information comes out, and it's starting to feel, at least I'm starting to feel, more and more like that the Jim Harbaugh news, there's a lot of more traction behind that than there was just 24 hours ago.
Right. It's getting weird in the sense that the things that we thought weren't going to happen are starting to happen. The things that we thought were not going to happen, were going to happen, have fallen apart. It's just every day it's changing. So every day we hop on here and break it down. So, Jack, let's go through the latest news and the latest developments in the Minnesota Vikings head coaching search as it continues day by day to change. The latest updates. You may have heard this, but some of these updates are brand new. So the Minnesota Vikings yesterday completed second interviews with Kevin O'Connell and Raheem Morris, both of the offensive and defensive coordinators for the Los Angeles Rams. Those are set. Those are done. Rams are focusing on the Super Bowl. The Vikings have what they need on those two candidates. DeMeco Ryans, this was kind of a strange one, pulled himself out of the running for this head coaching job there, Jack. What do you make of that before we move on to the next one here?
Yeah, I've seen a couple different reports on that one, and it seems like at the end of the day he wanted to develop his coaching style even further with Shanahan in San Francisco. He's a new coordinator, he's a new coach, he hasn't been coaching for that long, so I don't think it's something the Vikings should necessarily take as a slap in the face. And on top of it, I'm sure there are people within that San Francisco organization that has some ties to Jim Harbaugh. That's another interesting nugget that I've seen thrown out there, that hey, maybe Ryans feels that he's not going to be able to compete with somebody like a Jim Harbaugh. Hopefully it doesn't slap them in the face and it's like, hey, Harbaugh comes in here and then he uses that as leverage, something that you can hear us talk a little bit more in detail about in yesterday's show if you want to go back and watch that. But I don't think there's a ton to make out of it right now. And I think if there is somebody like a DeMeco Ryans who hears about a guy like Jim Harbaugh, named that big, I think it is, you can look at it and say, yeah, that might be not someone that I want to go up against in this coaching cycle. And I can promise you that his name is going to come up in future coaching cycles down the road.
Yeah, I'm kind of leaning that way too. I think yesterday when we talked, we both had DeMeco Ryans towards the bottom of our rankings as far as most likely, not necessarily who we like the most, but most likely as we're learning this news each and every day. And Jim Harbaugh starts to gain some steam. You have both O'Connell and Morris in the Super Bowl. You have Patrick Graham, who kind of came out of nowhere, who's now clearly like not a favorite, but someone of interest for Kwesi, right? DeMeco Ryans may or may not have been a favorite or an interesting character for Kwesi Adofo-Mensah to come in. But this is a way that you can control the narrative, right? You can be the one to say you didn't lose the job. You chose to stay instead. So I think that that's kind of the vibe I'm getting as well. Because if you can get a head coaching job and you think that you have a realistic shot to get it, you go for it. Worst case scenario, you don't get it and you still have the job that you had. Like, he's not losing his job because he applied for this one or interviewed for this one. He would still be the coordinator in San Francisco, even if they chose somebody else. So I think he kind of saw that the writing might have been on the wall, that they were more interested in the Rams coordinators and more interested in Jim Harbaugh as that started the game's team. And he just chose to take himself out of the running. So I think that's kind of what I'm feeling there. If you have any different thoughts, please throw it in the chat. We'll get the Q&A session at the end too. So any questions or thoughts or comments on Jim Harbaugh, Kirk Cousins, any of this stuff that we're going to talk about today, please feel free to throw that in the chat and we can break it down at the end of today's podcast session. The last one, Jack, that I want to bring up, let me see if I have a little nugget here. I do. Okay, Patrick Graham is set for his second interview today. This is an interesting one. I mentioned it to you a little bit. He seems to be a favorite of Kwesi, or a character that he wanted to interview. Specifically, Kwesi brought that one to the table because he wasn't on the radar until we had the general manager in place. It's weird to think that anybody from a Giants team that's been putrid for the last handful of years is interviewing for head coaching jobs, because it's not as if they've had great teams. But I did see some stats that they took a bottom third defense and he brought it to a top half defense this year. So there has been some movement as far as the defensive side of the ball. But for a team that on the surface, Jack, looks like they want an offensive coach potentially, and their interest is there for an offensive coach and someone who has had, proven success. He doesn't seem to fit that bill for me.
Yeah, and it's more weird. And again, this stems from a name as big as Jim Harbaugh being thrown in the hat. He's in Minnesota or coming to Minnesota today, and we're not hearing about it. There's not Patrick Graham pictures circulating around Twitter like Jim Harbaugh's face is everywhere currently. It's Patrick Graham. He's not a household name. I think there is a connection, an Ivy League connection. He was a Yale graduate himself, super smart, and he comes from that Belichick coaching tree. He spent a lot of time in New England, so I definitely wouldn't be opposed to Patrick Graham coming in and taking over that head coach. I think he's a very smart defensive mind. Having said that, I tend to agree with you. I think I'd want someone with a little bit more of an offensive philosophy, even if it is Raheem Morris, who's a defensive coordinator for the Rams. He still has some experience on the offensive side of the ball. And again, it's hard for these non-household names to compete with a fan base when there is a name like Jim Harbaugh that has been thrown into the hat.
Right. We mentioned that Kevin O'Connell and Raheem Morris did wrap up their interviews yesterday. Jack, one of the interesting little things that came to light yesterday with Kevin O'Connell was the Jacksonville Jaguars situation. They were going to request an interview with O'Connell to come in, but they weren't able to this week because the Super Bowl coaches can only be interviewed for a second time. If you hadn't had a first interview with any of these candidates, you can't talk to them until after the Super Bowl. That's an interesting wrinkle because there's a timing situation here. Let's just assume that Kevin O'Connell is the Minnesota Vikings' top candidate. Okay, that's our assumption right now. He's the top guy, the guy that if they can get him, they want him. If I'm O'Connell, I don't think there's any hurry for me to make a decision or make a commitment before the Super Bowl, because you have leverage with Jacksonville being interested. You have an opportunity there where if you tell Jacksonville, hey, just wait until after the Super Bowl and we'll at least have an interview, now you have a leverage point. You have another team that's interested. You have an opportunity there to get some more money. Depending on how you feel about the situation, I personally feel like Minnesota's a better opportunity to come in and win right away for sure, but long-term as well. But maybe he doesn't. Maybe he doesn't feel like that. So there's just a weird little timing thing that, might, in my mind, take Kevin O'Connell out of the good graces of the Minnesota Vikings. And that might be what pushes a guy like Jim Harbaugh or even, my dark horse favorite, Raheem Morris, to maybe jump ahead of him in that pecking order. What do you think about that idea?
Yeah, and something that's even makes us even more odd now. I'm not sure if you saw this. We probably should have talked about this before the show. Old Rick Spielman is interviewing with the Jacksonville Jaguars. I don't know if it's today or sometime this week for some sort of higher executive type role. Wouldn't that be something? Just more drama
Right.
that Vikings fans desperately need. Rick Spielman going after their number one candidate, if that is the case. But yeah, I agree with you. I don't think if I'm Kevin O'Connell, I would necessarily rush into the Vikings job. I don't know if he is the front runner. I've seen it almost feels like it's been 50-50, the front runner with O'Connell having some of the people saying he's the favorite and then Jim Harbaugh is the other favorite. It's tough for me. I think I said this yesterday too. I think I lean towards Jim Harbaugh. I'm not going to be upset if either of them are the next head coach of the Minnesota Vikings, but like you, I don't think he has any reason to jump the gun. I do think Jacksonville is slightly intriguing. I think they have a lot of cap space. They have the first overall draft pick. Again, they have Trevor Lawrence, who is supposed to be a generational type quarterback, not something you can get handed over to regularly. I think more often than not, you draft a rookie quarterback of the caliber of Trevor Lawrence. More often than not, that coach is still coaching the second year. He gets the benefit of the doubt. Obviously, that can't happen with everything that unfolded with Urban Meyer this season. But yeah, at the end of the day, I think I agree with you, and I don't think I would necessarily rush it. Also agree with you. I think Raheem Morris is still a dark horse candidate, and I would be more than thrilled if he was the next head coach of the Minnesota Vikings.
All right. Let's get to it. Jim Harbaugh is scheduled to fly to Minnesota tomorrow for I think they're calling it the second interview, but his first official interview, his first face-to-face with the team, his first opportunity to check out the facilities, which is an interesting thing there as well. He requested to check out the facilities, right? Everyone wants to see the facilities, but this was a specific thing that he wanted to come out here and see the facilities. It's a funny thing that I believe that Wednesday is National Signing Day for college athletics as well. So just a funny little kind of joke that Twitter has been running away with today. But Jim Harbaugh, there are reports coming out of Michigan, reporters that are from Michigan that cover the Michigan Wolverines and friends and close acquaintances of the Harbaugh family that are basically saying if they offer him this job, he will accept it. From what you're hearing, Jack, is he the front runner? I mean, we've used that word a couple times now. Does it feel like he is the number one desired candidate for this team? And if they want him, they can have him.
I think so. And if you come back tomorrow, the next time we record this podcast, I'm sure I could have a different answer for you because yesterday It was different as well. But right now with the reports that are coming out of Michigan, that same reporter, Sam Webb, he hosts, what's it called? Michigan Insider. He's talking about, he's got a lot of sources. He's plugged into the Michigan Wolverines world. And essentially what you just said, if he gets an offer, he's gone is what he's been talking about with his sources. Sounds like there's a couple hurdles that Harbaugh is going to have to get over during his interview tomorrow in Eagan. A couple of those things are his presence in the NFL. Obviously, he didn't leave the 49ers on great terms. I still think there are people within that building at TCO Performance Center that want to make sure he can kind of overcome that, and he's not going to have issues with Kwesi down the road. It seems kind of odd. Another thing that was said from the same reporter is saying that this isn't necessarily a Wilfs hire or looking into a hire. This is a Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah. He wants Jim Harbaugh. It sounds like that is his top guy. His words, not mine. Also, another kind of drawback is they want to kind of shift into this analytical era. They're a little bit concerned that a guy like Jim Harbaugh isn't going to adapt. But at the end of the day, if Jim Harbaugh comes into Eagan tomorrow and he awes everyone in that room or that interview room in that facility, I think the keys are his to this team.
I mean, it's hard to say. We talked about the ability that he has. He's the most proven coach that has an opportunity for this job. He has actually coached at this level. He has had success at this level. He's had varied success at every level that he's been at. So he knows what it's like up here. He knows what it's like down in college. He has that opportunity then to take that experience and go. The main thing that people keep talking about, Jack, is if people think that this team is ready to win, if they think that this isn't a rebuild, this is a team that's just looking to reload, get some new fresh blood in, and have that opportunity with new leadership. That's all. That's all they needed, was some new leadership. That Jim Harbaugh is the guy to step in and get them to that point quickly. When you look at the other candidates, though, Jack, how far back do you think they take a step? If that's the one thing that gets Harbaugh over the edge and the ability that he has experience at this level already and can come in right away, the roster doesn't change if they hire Kevin O'Connell. The roster doesn't change if Raheem Morris is chosen. If it is one of those other guys that doesn't have head coaching experience or doesn't have as much head coaching experience, does it take a super far step back? Is that gap between Harbaugh and those other candidates really that big?
I don't know. That's a great question because I could see one of two things happening if Jim Harbaugh is hired and he comes in here. Obviously, we've talked about this all offseason so far. That defense, regardless of whoever comes in at the head coach position, that defense needs retooling. It needs depth. It needs key starters. It needs a lot of help. You got to figure out what's going to happen with Danielle Hunter's future. And then you have money tied up. Obviously, losing a guy like Anthony Barr sounds more than likely at this time. That defense is going to need to get retooled. But the most interesting thing, which we're going to get into in a little bit, comes down to the future of Kirk Cousins. I've read a couple things. I don't know how legit this is. I've read a couple things saying that Jim Harbaugh is a Kirk Cousins believer. And at the end of the day, I think if Jim Harbaugh can come into Minnesota and he believes that Kirk Cousins can get him to that level that he needs to get to be named a successful coach in the NFL. I mean, like you said, he has a great proven track record, but at the end of the day, he lost the Super Bowl to his brother. That can't sit well in your stomach. I think he wants to get back at the biggest stage and hoist the Lombardi trophy. If he thinks he can do that with Kirk Cousins, they're going to have to figure out a way to reduce that cap hit, whether that's an extension or something weird with the cap that goes with that myself. But at the end of the day, he could also say, hey, you know what? He actually isn't the guy. Let's trade him out of here, get someone else in here, whether that's a Baker Mayfield or a Marcus Mariota, a bridge type quarterback, and then they draft a rookie and they let all three compete. Kellen Mond. That's another interesting area for me too, because Jim Harbaugh had success with Colin Kaepernick. He coached Andrew Luck at Stanford. He's had some success with different styles of quarterbacks. So I think that is the most intriguing thing in my eyes. If Jim Harbaugh steps in that building, what happens in the weeks to follow at the quarterback position?
Jack, another leading headline across the NFL. I know this one is near and dear to your heart. Tom Brady officially retires from the NFL. One of the greatest, if not the greatest quarterback of all time. Probably can just go ahead and say the greatest, most successful quarterback, 22 seasons. He made it official this time. It was not a report that came out a little too early, but he did post on his Instagram that he's ready to turn his focus to what's next in life, family and friends and different priorities. I know you're a Tom Brady fan. Tell me a little bit about what you think about his legacy and him retiring from the NFL.
Yeah, it's just going to be weird for me because I've grown up following the Vikings my entire life, obviously. So I think I was pulled towards Tom Brady at a younger age because I've essentially been labeled as a loser my entire life. I didn't get to feel what it felt like to win. And what's the polar opposite of the Minnesota Vikings? It was Tom Brady and the New England Patriots. And going to Super Bowl parties with my dad, I just remember as a child, all of the parents and the older people, they're bashing Tom Brady. They're like, I'm sick of seeing Tom Brady. And as a 6, 7, 8-year-old kid, I was like, you know what? My dad was a lobbyist and he's taught me well. I'm going to just go against the grain here. And I'm going to argue with all these adults that probably know way more about football. Actually, I shouldn't say that. They probably didn't know a lot more about football than me at that age because I was obsessed with football at that age as well. But it's going to be a different game without Tom Brady. I think it's pretty obvious that he's been the face of the NFL for the last 20 years. And it's going to be interesting. I think it opens up a huge door now for these young guys. We're already seeing it with the Justin Herberts, the Joe Burrows, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen. There's a ton of talent on the AFC side in terms of young quarterbacks. The NFC gets a little bit weird now, especially if Aaron Rodgers were to say, hey, pick up and go to a Denver. Maybe that's Aaron Rodgers' territory down there in Tampa Bay. Maybe that could be something that develops as well. But the NFC quarterback crop is decreasing, and that's going to have to kind of revolutionize in the upcoming years if they want to even contend with the AFC, because I don't see a lot of quarterbacks in the NFC right now that are going to go up against Patrick Mahomes, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert, Josh Allen, those guys in the Super Bowl and put up offensive numbers good enough to compete with those guys.
Well, and maybe that's why you focus on defense if you're in the NFC. But, Jack, I'm glad you kind of mentioned the potential for Aaron Rodgers, the different shakeup of the quarterbacks across the league, because this does raise another question, and it does create another opening for a quarterback in the league on a team that might just be a quarterback away. Inevitably, it comes to this. What does Tom Brady retiring mean for Kirk Cousins and or the Minnesota Vikings? This idea of trading Kirk Cousins to a team that thinks that they are a quarterback away continues to spread, right? You talk about the Browns, you talk about the Steelers, you talk about the 49ers. Now we can talk about the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as well as another team that is ready to win. They're proven ready to win. They have an opportunity to do these things and are one quarterback, one player away. Kirk Cousins is good enough to be that player away. I know we've said that before. We thought that was the case here in Minnesota, but you have another landing spot now for a guy like Kirk. Now, the Tampa Bay situation is a little interesting. The odds, there's already odds. Of course, there's odds on the next quarterback for the Tampa Bay Bucks moments after Tom Brady retires. There's an offshore betting agency that has put them out. Jimmy Garoppolo and Carson Wentz are the leaders in the clubhouse right now at plus 450. Those guys are more available than Kirk Cousins right now. Kyle Trask, the incumbent right now in Tampa Bay, is 550. And then it goes to Aaron Rodgers at plus 700. Teddy Bridgewater, Derek Carr, Ryan Fitzpatrick, Mariota, Newton, Winston, Taylor, and then you have Kirk Cousins at plus 1,600. Now, that's a long shot, right? It's not like he's a favorite. Tampa Bay, and mainly because Tampa Bay has cap issues. They are in a similar situation to the Minnesota Vikings right now. There's dead cap money that they got to figure out. So this would require Kirk to take a pay cut, and he has yet to prove that he is willing to do something like that. So you have the potential there. Do you think that there is a chance on earth that Kirk Cousins gets traded to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers?
Well, there's always a chance, and you bring up a point actually that I was going to bring up, and we've seen Tom Brady year over year take pay cuts to open up cap for his roster, because you know what? Tom Brady, at the end of the day, it's not over a couple $1 million. Yes, it might help that his wife makes a lot of money as well, but at the end of the day, Tom Brady, his end goal, what he's always been driven by, is Super Bowl trophies. It hasn't really been about the pay. He's even in New England, he was open to taking less money or moving the money around. And then you hear reports about Kirk Cousins where once he signs his deal, that he doesn't want to look at it until the contract is up. And I think that right there shows a little bit of the frustrations that you and I have towards Kirk Cousins. It stems from that and the leadership. It's a whole different feel what Tom Brady brought to the game of football versus what Kirk Cousins brings to the game of football. Both extremely talented quarterbacks, but at the end of the day, Tom Brady was willing to kind of jump around and move his contract around in order to fit other pieces of the puzzle onto the offense and defense of the teams that he's playing for. And if you look at that track record, it was proven successful. 7 rings, it speaks for itself. And I don't know if it would really work out with the cap situation. It'd be Kirk Cousins going from one team that's strapped for cash to another team that is also strapped for cash. But at the end of the day, I don't want to say that anything is impossible, because it's the NFL, and this is probably going to be one of the craziest off seasons that we've seen in recent memory.
Right. The value, assumed value for a quarterback like Kirk Cousins is something around the lines of a first-round pick plus like a fourth-round pick or something like that. If you have a good team like Tampa Bay that is likely to be at the end of the first round, maybe there's a little bit more sprinkled in there, whether it's a player or a third-round pick instead of a fourth or something like that. So that's
could you imagine the love that Kwesi would get during his first year if he traded him away to Tampa Bay and there was somehow, some way Antoine Winfield Jr. was on his way to Minnesota from Tampa Bay in that package? Probably unlikely. There's still a lot of people that are pretty pissed off about the Jeff Gladney pick over Antoine Winfield. I don't think that's necessarily fair, because these GMs aren't saying, hey, let's draft someone. It's a little bit different with Winfield because he has the legacy name as well. His dad played for the Vikings, but just because
nobody expected Gladney to be out of the league.
That's also true, but you can't just because he played at your favorite college doesn't mean he gets to play at your favorite or your favorite NFL team as well.
Right. It doesn't always work out that way. Jack, we're going to take some questions from the chat. So if you want to get in, you have a question or comment on today's topics or the coaching hunt for the Minnesota Vikings or Kirk Cousins being traded, throw it in the chat right now before we get to our Twitter poll, which we're going to do right now. And it kind of ties right into what you were just talking about, Jack. I did post a Twitter poll earlier today. Let me pull it up here, talking about that idea of Kirk Cousins. What do you want to happen to Kirk Cousins this offseason? Do you want him to stay with Minnesota for 1 year, kind of a prove-it year? Do you want him to get traded? Do you want him to get extended? And the early results are in that most of the Vikings fans, half of them approximately, want Kirk Cousins to be traded. That's a 50.8% lead. The rest go the favor of keeping him here for 1 year, whether that's a bridge year or you're making him prove it or whatever you want to call that. And then the other 21% love Kirk and they want him to get extended. Probably what factors into that is with a more favorable deal as well. It's not just an extension. extension based off of his merit, but more so a favorable deal that gives the cap relief that they need to build a team around him. So no surprise there. I think that we could have guessed based off of the vibe that we feel on social media that most people want him just gone and not have to worry about it. They're dreaming of a Herschel Walker return. That's not going to be the case. But could be something that would be interesting for a new regime to explore. The questions and answers. Jack, I've seen a couple of them in here. I'm going to search real quick. Most of them are on topic, and most of them are on the Harbaugh/Cousins topic. Here's a good one here from Sean Reynolds. If the head coaching job is Harbaugh's to lose, do you think that he would want to try Cousins for his final year? Do you think that he would prefer a proven quarterback who can play in this league for this 2020 season?
If he's coming in with the end goal in 2022 to win right now, I think Kirk Cousins is probably playing quarterback in 2022. I don't know if that necessarily means an extension. Maybe they just let him play 1 year out or the final year of his deal out, and they still draft a quarterback. The thing is, with Kirk Cousins playing in 2022, yes, they might contend, but they also might have another year like they did this year, because I just don't think it's not going to be very easy to rebuild that defense up given the cap situation. And then we get into the conversation about, hey, it is Kirk Cousins' last hurrah in Minnesota, and they don't make the playoffs. They go 8-9 or 9-8 and miss out on the playoffs, and they have the same exact. It just kind of it's the Viking cycle. The mediocrity continues. They get a draft pick in the teens, low teens somewhere, and then they don't have that spot to go up and get a guy like C.J. Stroud or Bryce Young, whoever the top quarterback is going to be following the 2022 collegiate season. And it kind of feels like a revolving door with Kirk Cousins. And I think I voted on your poll. I did vote that I'm in the category that I want him to get traded right now. If Jim Harbaugh and Kwesi Adofo-Mensah come in, get their hands on this roster and say, you know what? No, this roster is good enough to win right now, and they want to continue doing that with Kirk Cousins, that's certainly something that I will be behind, because I've said it, you've said it, Kirk Cousins is good enough to get the job done, but he's going to need some help, and I just don't see him getting that help given the current contract situation.
So let me change this question a little bit. This question was specifically about Jim Harbaugh. If one of the other options, one of the younger, more up-and-coming guys like Kevin O'Connell or Raheem Morris gets the head coaching job, do you think it's more or less likely that they will stick with Kirk Cousins for 1 year and then maybe move on?
I feel like it'd be less likely.
I think so too.
O'Connell intrigues me, though, just because he was Kirk's quarterback coach in 2017. But at the end of the day, if he says, you know what, I know what Kirk Cousins is, he's not going to get me to my end goal. He knows that. He's coached a guy, but maybe it's the other side of the spectrum. Maybe he believes in Kirk Cousins and he thinks that he was just on a Rams team that traded for Matthew Stafford, who was not a winner in Detroit, and look where that got them. They're in the Super Bowl now. So maybe he comes in, but I could certainly see Kevin O'Connell, Raheem Morris, Jim Harbaugh coming in and going in either direction.
Let's look here. Joshua wants to know if we consider trading Danielle Hunter to gather a few picks and help replace the aging defensive starters. Now, Jack, there are aging defensive starters that are on the table to be talked about across the board, whether that be trades or releases. Harrison Smith is a name. Anthony Barr is a name. We've talked about Danielle Hunter, his questions with his injury situation. There are expensive players on that defensive side of the football that a new regime may not feel the same way as the old regime felt about, specifically Danielle Hunter, and then expand that beyond to maybe the other players. Do you think that there will be some big names that are familiar names, I guess, to Minnesota fans that won't be with us this next coming season?
I do think there will be names that won't be on the roster come 2022, or we're in 22, come the start of the regular season. I don't know if Danielle Hunter can be one of those names because he is pound for pound the most talented player on that defense. He's still young enough. I know there's been some injury concerns, but when the guy is on the field, the Vikings defense is better because of him. And if you lose a guy like Danielle Hunter, I think we saw it this year a little bit, even though it felt super weird that the Vikings were like second in terms of total sacks. But
I know,
when Danielle Hunter stepped off the field, it didn't feel like, and it's in run support too. A guy like DJ Wanham is not securing the edge like a guy like Danielle Hunter. He's not as good. And when we saw Everson Griffin go through some of his stuff this season and then Danielle Hunter get the injury, the pass rush from the outside it was not the same. And That's how we've talked about this several times. That's how you win football games in the NFL. You need pass rushers. That is a top 3, top 4, arguably most important position behind quarterback. And I think like left tackle, having a good pass rusher and a good disruptor of an opposing quarterback wins you football games. And if the Vikings trade Danielle Hunter away, quite frankly, I don't think they have that on the roster currently.
Yeah, no, part of what proves a lot of those things, and you this is just sacks specifically, but you can extend that to the run stop and sealing the edge as well, is it was until like week 15 or something, Danielle Hunter was still the leading sack guy on this team until I think DJ Wanham passed him. So, I mean, it's not like there's a plethora of dynamic players on the defensive line right now. They're going to have to do something in free agency, going to have to do something in the draft, and going to have to make some sort of a decision on Danielle Hunter. Let's close out with one more, Jack. Matthew Adamson wants to know, if the Vikings decide to move on from Kirk, what's the best option for a starting quarterback? Free agent, draft, trade, and are there any names that intrigue you for them to go after?
Yeah, there's a few, and I want to address this in kind of a different way. There's people out there that say, hey, what happens if they trade Kirk Cousins? There's not an answer for the replacement. There doesn't have to be an answer for the replacement, even though I just said that about Danielle Hunter. The quarterback position, I think you can bring in a bridge-type quarterback, whether that's a Gardner Minshew, Drew Lock, Marcus Mariota, Teddy Bridgewater, although I don't think Teddy Bridgewater is coming back now that Mike Zimmer's gone, but there's a lot of guys that intrigue me there. I think you also address the position at some point in the draft, whether that's a first-round pick, second-round pick, depending on what you get in return for Kirk Cousins as well. I think some quarterbacks are going to start to slide because it has been labeled not as good of a class. So I think there's a chance the Vikings could get their guy with that 12th overall pick. But then if you take a quarterback there, what are you going to do at cornerback this year? I don't know. Maybe you address that in free agency, but I think you have to kind of embrace the unknown. Maybe they bring in a guy and they draft a guy and Kellen Mond starts lighting it up throughout training camp. We don't know. He hasn't been given that chance. Neither has, if a rookie quarterback comes in here, you'll probably hear me talk about this guy's name several times throughout the course of the offseason. But Matt Corral is another guy that intrigues me. I know there's other people that say Carson Strong, Malik Willis. There's a lot of intriguing options that I think are going to be there from where the Vikings pick in the first round all the way to where the Vikings pick in the second round. But at the end of the day, it's going to come down to whoever the coach is and what Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, who they view as the top quarterback in this class in the free agency cycle, and how they view Kirk Cousins. If they want to move on from that contract, that doesn't bother me one bit. And it doesn't matter who the quarterback is following Kirk Cousins, because they're saying, hey, we're going to take a step backwards before we can take a step forward. And I think that is kind of where the Vikings are at right now. I think that is what is needed.
Right. All right. We'll see. We got some time to figure that out. There's, guys like Ryan Fitzpatrick that make careers out of being bridge quarterbacks, bounce around to teams that are in between, hoping for a young guy to move up and do that. So not saying it'll be Fitzpatrick, but there are options. So don't get too worried there. Thanks to everyone who took part in that little Q&A session. Thanks to everyone who took part in our live stream. We'll do these as often as we need to do them. We'll probably do another one this week after a head coach is named. So we'll see. Stay tuned. Make sure you subscribe to the State of Purple podcast on iHeartRadio, iTunes, or wherever you get your favorite podcasts to find old episodes, but also to be alerted whenever we go live or whenever we have a new episode that posts. It'll be sent straight to your inbox, and you'll never miss anything Minnesota Vikings from KFAN and the State of Purple. So until maybe tomorrow, we'll see. He's Jack Day. I'm Aj Mansour. This is the State of Purple podcast, and we're looking for a head coach still. So we'll see you later.
10 seconds to go. We need a Minneapolis miracle. Case on a deep drop. Steps up in the pocket. He'll fire to the right side.